One day in a teacher's second-year-old classroom, there was a young student named Mark who kept talking. And she made the mistake of announcing that if he kept talking, she would have to go and tape his mouth shut. Well, as 7 and 8-year-olds sometimes do, they start to get a little excited and looking for the person to have a mistake or a mishap. And shortly thereafter, one of the students raised their hand and said, "Teacher, teacher," Mark's still talking. At which point she walked over, put tape over his mouth, and walked back to the front of the room. She stood there for a moment and then looked at Mark, at which point he winked at her. And she lost all control and began to laugh out loud, and she had to go over and remove the tape. Mark sat there and smiled, and when he left the class that day, he walked up to her and said, "Teacher, thank you for teaching today." Fast forward a few years later, and the teacher was asked to teach a late junior high, early freshman level class. I think 9th grade it was. And as time went on, Mark ended up in her class. One particular day, the students sat around and were doing an assignment. And the teacher could tell there was a little bit of lull in the activities. Kids weren't quite as engaged as she'd like them to be. They seemed to be faltering and falling asleep. And she came up with an idea. There was 31 students in the class, and so she had each of the 31 students write the name of their classmates on a piece of paper and leave a line, a space in between each name. And then what she did is she had each student write as many kind things as they could about the other students. At the end of the day, she collected all the papers, and Mark was one of the last ones to hand his in. At the end of the day, he looked at her, smiled, and said, "Thank you, teacher, for teaching today." Over the weekend, the teacher took the papers home, and she just worked tirelessly to transcribe everything, taking 31 sheets of paper and filling in all the things that each student had said, so everybody had these full pieces of paper of what other people found kind or they liked about them. At which time, when she'd returned back to school the next day, on a Monday, she gave them out to everyone. No one said much about them. She saw them shuffle around. She saw a few of them timidly read them. She saw a couple smiles, and that was that. Nothing much came of it after that, and she often wondered if it made a difference to anyone. Fast forward several years into the future, and maybe 10, 15 years has gone by at this point. The teacher's with her parents, and she's just returned home from a trip, and her parents have picked her up from the airport. And as they're driving on the freeway, the mom and dad look nervously at one another, and the teacher had the sense that there was something wrong. You know the feeling that you get when there's this unspoken something. You don't know what it is, but you know that there's something. And so finally she asked her parents what was happening. At which point the parents looked at one another, and the dad finally spoke and said, "Sweetie, there's something we have to tell you. Mark has died. He was killed in Vietnam." The teacher's heart flew into her chest. She was so floored and aghast because all she could remember is that sweet boy from 2nd grade winking at her when he had his mouth taped shut. The mom then said that the parents had asked that she come and attend the service. This is a very small town, so everybody knew everybody. And upon attending his service, she had never witnessed a military procession before, where everybody was in dress and the colors were displayed and taps were played and so on and so forth. And as they made their way one by one up to the coffin, she was the last one to go up there, and she looked in and saw the young boy that she once saw, the man laying in the coffin that was once the young boy who was in her classroom. She wept as she sprinkled the holy water over his body, and she began to walk away. At which point one of his comrades came up to him and said, You're this teacher, right? You're the teacher. Mark talked about you often." She smiled and she shook her head, quite shocked that he would talk about a teacher that he had so long ago. And then she saw his parents. His parents were obviously waiting there for him, and she went over to his parents and they pulled something out and they said, "We thought you might recognize this." At which point they pulled out a piece of paper that had obviously been folded and taped and torn many times over. And it was a note. It was the sheet of paper where once upon a time a teacher had the idea of having her students write down all the things that other people found kind and they liked about the students in their class. So they said that Mark had it on him when he was killed in Vietnam, and it was clear that it had meant very much to him. In fact, it had been one of his greatest treasures. The teacher wept at that when she realized how that simple gesture she had made so many years before had made such a profound impact on one young man's life. You want to make an immediate difference in your life or the life of someone else? Do something kind for someone else today, because you never know how, when, where, or why that will affect somebody. But what you can be certain of is no act of kindness, no small act of kindness will ever go unrecognized, because the difference you make today could be the difference that it makes in somebody's life for years and years to come.